Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the Golden Stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now here's Brian.
Happy New Year from the Golden Stallion to all the Sovrynati. Oh boy. Well, I have a little treat here for you, and this is not what I'm going to call a special. This is actually I guess I'm going to call it a Sovryn Tech Quickie. I suppose I could come up with other names, but I kind of like the idea of a Quickie. I enjoy those very much. And so what this is, it's going to be, and I'll do these, relatively common. And I mentioned in past episodes of Sovryn Tech that I wanted to do these, that I want, sometimes I just have a thought or something quick that I want to get out there and I want to talk about. And maybe it doesn't fit well into a Sovryn Tech episode. And I don't want to turn it into an entire special, because if every little goddamn thing's a special, it's not very special, is it? Of course not. So, we're here for a little New Year's Quickie, and you get to enjoy it. So this Quickie, I don't really suppose that this is a terribly important issue, but then that's why, maybe I don't really want it to be a part of of an official Sovryn Tech episode. This is kind of more bonus content, I suppose. And it's just a bit of a rant on my part. The lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I, we went to we were kind of on a vacation of sorts over the holidays. And whenever we're on one of those little vacations, if it's not, to some wacky other place in the U.S., but still within New England, we usually end up watching some degree of television. And this has often been a great source of content for other shows like Sex and Science Hour, where we would talk about, there's this documentary show on, I know it's hard to call it even a documentary, but it's a show on the Learning Channel called Sex Sent Me to the ER. And, among other things, there's a whole bunch of shows that, that we would end up catching on that, like there's Swamp People and, all these various things. And so we ended up catching, a fair amount of television, either, not necessarily that it was grabbing our full attention so much, maybe sometimes, but just, we're relaxing for once, because we generally don't relax much. And she's working all the time. I have like 3 or 4 different jobs that I do, by and large. So we're watching these shows, and now it seems, and I guess over the past few years, and granted, I haven't had regular cable in, I don't know, it's been 4 or 5 years, I guess, since I've had since I lived in New York, that I actually had like cable television. And I guess since then, in those 5 years or so, like Discovery, the Discovery Channel, they've become the biggest thing in cable somehow. like they have tons of channels. They have tons of networks. As I understand it, Discovery Channel used to have, they had the Learning Channel where they branched out. I think they had the Science Channel. They had some others. I think National Geographic is their only competition, and I don't know what they run as compared to what Discovery Channel runs, and I don't really care at all because I don't watch television that much to give a shit. But Discovery Channel has tons of channels now. Like they actually, one of them's pretty good. It's a car network called Velocity that I enjoyed watching some of the shows on with that. And then there's, they have Animal Planet, which has really fallen far from the tree. for lack of a better phrase, because it used to be about animals. Now it seems to be just, all bullshit humans on there. And it seems like on a lot of their networks, Destination America is another one. On a lot of their networks, there are just tons of these reality, and that's mainly pretty much what they are at the end of the day. They may be more documentary style, but they are just reality TV shows. And there's tons of them about Alaska now. And, I love Alaska. I actually almost moved to Alaska. I've been to Alaska. I've been to Kodiak Island, and it was stunning. But Alaska's a great place. I get it. The last frontier. In fact, I've talked about Alaska on Sovryn Tech, I know, in the past, because one of the things I enjoy about it is that when you go to Alaska, kind of the nice thing about being there is generally if someone's there, it's because they want to be there. Like they made a conscious choice and they realized that they would be moving into some relatively harsh conditions. Even though, I know Anchorage, I know all that stuff is, it's more or less like any other city now, blah, blah, blah. I fucking get it. Okay. Nitpickers. So, I always like that. And I like the idea, kind of the more of the, again, the more frontiersman, kind of lifestyle and all that stuff. I can appreciate that, even though I know it would shock some people considering that I run a science and tech show. And so, there's some enjoyment in seeing what life in Alaska is, quote unquote, like. And I say in quotes because that really gets to the thrust of what I want to talk about here. So, we're watching these shows. I'm either watching it or Stephanie and I are watching it, or, whoever's watching it, whatever. And on these shows, there's one instance, I'll just get right to it since this is a Sovryn Tech Quickie. There's one instance where they're following around, I think it was one of these Alaskan railroad shows or whatever, and they're following around what equates to the Alaskan police. And I guess along the Alaskan Railroad is a very serious thing. Like it's very much like the Nile River for the Egyptians, where it is in many ways the lifeline for a lot of people in Alaska. And I get that, whatever. Okay. Central point of failure, but I get it. It's the frontier. And, I guess along the railroad, there are some degree of, I don't know what they want to call them, trespassers or intruders, whatever. I don't know. And so this, these police, drive along the railroad to see if people are messing around on it or whatever they're doing. And I guess he runs into a very young couple, as in probably teenagers, a guy and a girl. And they are, they're on a four-wheeler, and the four-wheeler apparently gets stuck on the railroad tracks. I guess it makes sense that, you'd want to drive on the railroad tracks because it's relatively smooth in comparison to the bulk of the land around that, that you would get on, with the four-wheeler. And I guess the four-wheeler breaks down. And so the police officer is freaking out, saying, hey, what are you guys doing here? You can't be on the railroad like this. Oh my God, your four-wheeler's broken down. What kind of compromising position were the two of you just in? What the hell's going on here? We got to get this four-wheeler off the track. The train's coming. Oh my God, we're all going to die. And here's the point with all of this. First off, I think it obviously, or maybe not obviously, I think a lot of that is just straight up staged. But the worst part of it all is that, again, this is getting pitched to you as reality. This is not getting pitched to you as in any way being fictional at all, which, not to say Discovery Channel hasn't done docudramas or fictional shit in the past, like they had that mermaid documentary that was all, that was essentially fictional. Okay, but this is being pitched to you as reality. Now, the situation, very tense music happening. They can't, we got to find somebody that can lift this, help us lift the, because the four-wheeler's not going to start. We got to find somebody to lift the four-wheeler off of the track and get it out of the way before that train hits. And who knows what's going to happen because of that. Not like the train wouldn't just obliterate that four-wheeler in the first place, regardless. They find a guy who was around, and they even do a little, they find a railroad worker who is around, who helps them lift the vehicle off, helps the cop and the two, and then the young couple lift the vehicle off. And, and the day is saved, and they interview the railroad worker after, and he says, I'm glad I was here, to be able to get that off there. And here's the thing, this whole scene's getting filmed. Who the fuck's filming that scene that can't help them get that four-wheeler off the goddamn railroad track? If lives are on the line, drop the goddamn camera and help them lift that four-wheeler up. But no, they didn't do that because they were still recording. You can see the people, you can see the whole situation happen where this guy comes up and they had to go find this. Why'd you have to go find the railroad worker? Just fucking get the camera guy to get that thing off of there. It's all bullshit. I mean, I'm just dying laughing, seeing this because I'm like, who believes this crap? Who doesn't see this shit for the absolute shit that it is? What kind of losers watch this and think that somehow it's serious or that it in any way reflects real life? Like I said, I watched it. I enjoyed seeing, what Alaskan life was like until someone kind of comes to their senses and says, wait a minute, this can't be real at all. Or the situations where bears are coming and all this stuff. It's all staged. Because if it was serious, the camera guys wouldn't be anywhere near there. If real lives were on the line, people would be running it would be a totally different situation than what you're seeing. But these shows are insanely popular. Insanely popular. And I'm not saying there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with making shows like this. I used to be, I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I'm always kind of reticent to admit it because it seems to come with a lot of shame. I used to be a really serious wrestling fan, big time, WWE, TNA, WCW, ECW, all of that. And, maybe that's what kind of makes me sensitive to makes my bullshit meter a little more sensitive, because I know when someone's doing a crap job of trying to portray reality, that's not real at all. So, and the point I want to, an example that I want to bring up to you of how this could even be done right. That's the other thing too. Like I said, there's nothing necessarily wrong with how they're doing it, but these people are just lazy in how they're making this. They're fucking lazy as hell. So the case in point I want to bring up to you is, and we'll talk about how it gets done wrong, and then we'll talk about how it gets done right. And we're going to use a wrestling example. So the year it's like 1997, 96, 97, somewhere around there. And the greatest wrestler of all time, in my opinion, and perhaps objectively, Ric Flair, the Nature Boy. Woo! Right. That one. The original Golden Stallion. He has become the president of the WCW. Now, in reality, he hasn't become the president of the WCW. Ted Turner still more or less owns it, and at the time, really, Eric Bischoff was calling the shots for the whole company, pretty much on camera and off camera, and for now, it wasn't on camera. And so Ric Flair, there's this coup, there's this group, what they call a stable in wrestling, which is a group of guys. That's why they call it a wrestling stable. And you get the comparison to horses here, Golden Stallion. You get the point. So anyway, a stable is a group of wrestlers that have a similar goal. And so a very famous, and this could get into a whole other subject, but I'm not going to go there because this is just a quickie. But one of the most famous stables of all time is what's known as the NWO, the New World Order. And the NWO was trying to regain control of the WCW at the time, which is World Championship Wrestling. And so they plan out this hit on the then quote-unquote president of the WCW, Ric Flair. And so in the episode the show, it was called Monday Night Nitro, they're showing Ric Flair getting into a limousine, and there's a camera in the limousine, and the limousine's driving down the road, and he's talking with some of his guys, saying, all right, this is what we're going to do tonight. This is how we're going to deal with NWO and all that. And a camera being in a limousine, nothing too crazy about that. It's like, okay, yeah, I get your artistic license here. What could be going on? The conversation that could be going on could still be, more or less important, and maybe they just wanted to show it off or whatever. But at the same time, still, if Ric Flair's trying to have a secret meeting on how to deal with, enemy factions within his organization, you wouldn't want that getting put out on air, right? So that's still crappy. But whatever, the limousine's not so bad. So as they're driving down the road, there's a point where the guys riding with Ric Flair get dropped off, at some hotel. And then Ric Flair's like, yeah, all right, take me to my hotel. And on the way there, they end up going through the country. The driver starts going the wrong way. Ric Flair starts freaking out. And eventually the limousine stops in the middle of nowhere out in the country. And, some guys jump Ric Flair. They open up the door and then they jump Ric Flair and they leave him out. In the grass. Okay. So again, you kind of, with it being in the limousine, it's like, okay, there doesn't have to be a cameraman there. There could just be a camera in the limousine. That all makes sense. But then when you see the aftermath of Ric Flair getting jumped, Ric Flair is laying in the field in the middle of the night. Now what, is there just a camera sitting out there in the field in the middle of the night? No, there's a cameraman there. And this is where it gets this is where it's bad. But believe me, it gets worse. Okay. But do you see the point? It's like you're trying to show off some degree of reality. That's the point with wrestling, is it's supposed to make the fake look very real. You're not supposed to go into what they call kayfabe. Okay. And so like instantly anybody, even the smallest child, should be saying to himself, wait a minute. Why isn't the cameraman helping Ric Flair? He's beat up laying in the middle of a field. And there's nobody around. Why is he just shooting? Why is he just aiming the camera at Ric Flair and not doing anything at all, being perfectly still? Then, a little bit later on in the episode and on the night of Monday Night Nitro, there's suddenly, the announcers want to find out what's happening to Ric Flair, and the announcers are like commenting on what's happening with Ric Flair. It's like, wait a minute. The reality distortion field is just like, it's totally out of whack. What's going on here? And so then there's a moment where suddenly you see a truck driver in his truck driving, like as in the camera is on the hood of the truck looking into the cabin of the truck. And so you see the face of the truck driver and, his hands are moving back and forth like he's steering the wheel or whatever, kind of like B.A. Baracus would in the A-Team. And next to him is Ric Flair, knocked out. And, who knows where this truck driver is taking him, whatever. It doesn't matter. But this was such an epic fail. The most epic of fails of trying to take something like wrestling. And yes, people knew that wrestling was fake, but you were supposed to more or less, you're supposed to keep the illusion up. Kind of like with these reality TV shows. You're supposed to keep the illusion up as best as possible. But they dropped the ball. They totally dropped the ball on that. And it was ridiculous. And if you want to wonder, how did Vince McMahon, the head of WWE, how did he end up buying his own competition, that being WCW, which, just a year or two before was beating his ass in the ratings? How did he do it? Well, that's how. Because if you treat your audience like they're a joke, if you treat them like, imbeciles, then, who's going to pay attention to you? Who's going to watch you? Well, I guess imbeciles will. But that's kind of the problem. If it's still popular, like with the Discovery Channel shit that they're putting on people, what does that say about society? If those shows are popular, I guess we're just surrounded by absolute fucking, Muprons. So, but let's talk about how you can do this right. And actually, we'll use Ric Flair once again, because when he's actually in charge of a situation, it seems like he can really pull it off. And so let's go back 10 years from the date that we were just talking about. This is about 1987, 1988, something like that. Maybe it was like 86, whatever. We're talking about the mid to late 80s. And Ric Flair is a part of, like we mentioned, stables, like the New World Order, the NWO in wrestling, which Hulk Hogan was the head of. Ric Flair was the head of his own stable at the time. And it was kind of the original, or not the original, but definitely a prototype for all stables to come after. And it was known as the Four Horsemen. And this group was a bunch of, badass guys. And part of the reason, they're exceptionally popular. This is the weird thing, is that for a very rare moment in time, the bad guys were really getting cheered for. And there were more fans for the quote unquote bad guys, or the heels, as compared to a face. The heels in wrestling, were more popular than the faces, than the good guys. And that's because, oddly enough, everything that, Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen that they would talk about that they were doing, like when they go to the hotel that night, and have it, rent out the whole top of the hotel, have a bunch of ladies up there, whatever, or when they would, fly in their private jets and all this stuff, they really did do all that. Like, they were the real deal, like in and out of the ring. And again, this was more of a time where people still, I think some people still believe that wrestling was real at the time. But again, part of that, the reason that facade still held up in the 80s was because it was treated that way. It was treated like they went to great pains to keep this, keep this facade going, to keep making it look real. And so the Four Horsemen, everything that they talked about that they did on air, by and large, they did. And, obviously when they went in the ring, of course, that was all set up. But they made it look good, as wrestlers often do. And, just a quick point about wrestlers. I've always said this. They really are. They are the greatest athletes on planet Earth. Professional wrestlers really are. And why is that? It's because it's one thing to do a lot of those acrobatics and crazy tricks and all that shit. To be able to do that alone is impressive. But to be able to do that and fake it and just to do it to make it look good, I think is a whole other level of athleticism that most people just never reach. So anyway, that's besides the point. So the Four Horsemen were living it up. They made everything look good. And there was a very famous rivalry between Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes. Okay, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, who's another very popular wrestler. He's kind of the everyman wrestler, as to where Ric Flair was this, the rich man, the hoity-toity, living it up, the high life, the whole thing. And the Four Horsemen decide to do a hit, a non-lethal hit on Dusty Rhodes. Not unlike what happened to, like we discussed previously, where the NWO jumped Ric Flair in his limousine. And so they go out there. You're following the Four Horsemen. This happens on an episode of, whatever they called it back then. It wasn't Nitro back then, but it was that day's wrestling. And they end up following, there's a camera crew, in the back of in the cars with the Four Horsemen, and they pull up to somewhere where Dusty Rhodes is parked. They all get out. The Four Horsemen get out. They tie up Dusty Rhodes to like this fence, and they break his arm, or they make it look like they break his arm. They black it out and all this stuff when you finally see it, because of course you're not watching live television. This is something that was recorded, and it all looks very, very intense. What's happening. They actually totally skip out on the music, and it looks really crazy. And people really thought that like something criminal happened. Okay. Wrestling fans at the time were literally calling the police and thought something went down. I mean, this was very much a War of the Worlds situation. And that's a credit to how this worked. And so what the, at the time, WCW, it wasn't Jim Crockett, whatever, the guy that owned everything back then, what they said was, when people were getting in touch with them, is like, look, the Four Horsemen, Ric Flair, he paid for the airtime. He paid for the camera crew. We had nothing to do with this. I mean, that's the thing, is they played up this unreal situation that they were trying to make look as real as possible. They played it up all the way to the, to the top. And it was like, that's how you do it. You know, that's the thing. If you want to make, somewhat of a reality show, okay, but you don't want to insult your audience and you want to stay popular and relevant and fresh, that's how you do it. You do it how they did it, to where you make it like, oh yeah, they bought the time, they did this, they hired the camera crews, they do. But the shit that's getting put on you now with swamp people, with these Bigfoot hunters, with the Alaskan Railroad or the Alaskan Fishing Expedition, or the West Fuck Me's, what I don't know what the hell they all these shows are. They're just not real at all, and I'm almost like, it's depressing. Because I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of television, but it's like, for fuck's sake, do it right. And you can do it right. I just gave you an example of how you can get it done. And, they had, obviously, in the case with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, and breaking his arm, the horseman told the camera guys, all right, come on, you're coming with us. And they leave, and it was all very intense, and obviously in post, they blocked out the part where, because they didn't really break his arm. They just, they fuzzed it out to make it look like it. And since it wasn't live, they could pull that off, all this stuff. There's ways to make this shit work. Okay, so what I'm discussing isn't necessarily important, and that's why I'm just doing it for a Sovryn Tech Quickie, okay? But I wanted to get this out there because I was really frustrated. But the important point that I do have in all of this is that my frustration comes from the fact that if there's people who don't watch this, and because I'm looking on Twitter, people take this very seriously. They're not, because you can look up their hashtags about everything and people interact with the show and all that stuff, which that's a whole other thing. Holy shit. If TV has not turned into a gigantic ADD fest, where you've got pop-ups coming up. I mean, pop-up videos from VH1, 20 years ago is nothing compared to what they've got going on now. At least back then, they'd give you data. Now you're just reading, like information about what you were seeing. Now you're just reading bullshit from people from who knows where. But these people are all taking it very serious, and it's like, could someone please come out and at least say that they, that this is a joke? That this isn't reality at all? And so I'm a little concerned, I'm a little concerned that, I don't want to be that guy that comes out and says, that 80% of the human population is a bunch of idiots. But what other conclusion can I come to if this kind of television isn't laughed off of the stage or laughed off of the network? I don't know. You can, of course, email me about it, brian@zomiaofflinegames.com, or you can get in touch with me via BitMessage. BitMessage has been very active, and I am so glad that people are making good use of that. Or, of course, you can get in touch with me via Twitter, and, you can share your thoughts on it. But shit, man, the shows are just so ridiculous. I mean, and it's, and that's, I'm glad I brought up the wrestling thing. Because as I was a wrestling fan, I keep getting, I remember getting picked on and made fun of quite a bit for saying, look, don't you know that's fake? Hey, people, you want to pick on everybody that watches Alaskan Railroad and Swamp People and all that shit? That's more fake than wrestling could ever dream of being. At least in wrestling, you have to have some kind of skill. There's a good reason why you're in the ring. There's a good reason you're in front of that camera. As to where these people, double standards as always. Anyway, that's it. I thought what would we run, about a half hour here? That's good. Sometimes they'll be a lot shorter. I had to get this one out. I was laughing, but then afterwards, you want to inside, what's the old Joker? It's like, my smile is only skin deep, but inside I'm really crying. Perhaps sometime you'll join me for a weep. Yeah, because inside I'm just like, oh my God, people fall for this. This is popular. And it's not popular because people are insulting it. It's popular because, I don't know, maybe it's making people feel better somehow inside that they're not at least living there. Oh, it's pathetic. Anyway, Carpe Lucem, everybody. I'll have another special offer for you this week, and of course, the regular episode, which might be a touch of a surprise this week that I think everybody will enjoy, and I'll have that out to you. So, see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.